Hey everybody, welcome to week 2 of the course. This week we are delving into Usability 101. We are going to take a look at it from the perspective of user experience and kind of try to decouple these two things, usability and user experience, which are often kind of talked about in the same breath. We're going to talk about the different dimensions of usability, how those dimensions affect user experience, and I'm just going to quickly walk through some of the different methods that we'll be going through in class and you'll be performing as big parts of your assignments and projects and things like that. So this is Usability 101, and inherently we are trying to understand user experience. The purpose of understanding the usability of a particular user interface is understanding how it affects users and their journeys to using that piece of a system. So delving in quickly, usability, thinking about UI, right? So the user interface. So right now you're watching this probably in a Canvas, you click to get here through Canvas, you're probably watching it on YouTube. Each one of these systems has their own user interface that you're interacting with anytime you click play or pause or speed my voice up because I'm talking too slowly, or any number of these things. These are all options you have as users when you're using these different systems. So when we talk about the usability of a system, we tend to think about it in terms of at least 5 different dimensions. There's a number of other things that we will get to in the latter part of the semester, but at their most basic, any system, any product or service has to consider these 5 basic dimensions: learnability, efficiency, memorability, error tolerance and prevention, and finally satisfaction, which I'm hoping in this presentation will kind of dovetail for us into user experience and kind of understanding these things. So let's look at those dimensions as they compare to user experience. So you have those 5 basic dimensions that affect a user when they're working within any type of system. When we tend to think of user experience as things that the user experiences, right? So is the system aesthetically pleasing? Is it, kind of a pleasure to look at and to interact with? Is it ergonomic? Meaning, as an example, let's think about, say, video games, where, every video game is going to have some sort of control scheme. You're going to have to know how those buttons work. Is that friendly to the body? Is it friendly to how users interact with that system? Is it useful? Does it, provide a purpose for the user? Is it easy to understand? So when we're looking at usability, we were I had mentioned learnability or memorability. Is it for the user? Do those come across in terms of a system that's easy to understand? Is it overall pleasurable? Do they like using it? Is it expressively supportive, meaning that, it gives users scaffolding along the way, if they run into an issue or navigate to the wrong place or don't know how to do something that they're trying to? Is it supportive to the user? Maybe going a little broader, is the system kind of consistent with moral values and cultural mores? So the culture that the user is approaching the system from within, is it consistent with, their moral values and their understanding of, right and wrong and things like that? And then kind of, is it informationally valuable? This ties into being useful, right? Is this information that they're getting from a system, does it contribute more to their kind of growing ability to use it? So I kind of see these things as kind of, we have those 5 dimensions of usability, and I see all of these kind of user experience dimensions as, in many ways, products of, errors in usability that, a website or an app or video game or, any number of things may have. A way to think about this kind of dichotomy is thinking first about system acceptability. Is the system acceptable to users, for what they're coming to do on that system? So, example of Craigslist, right? It's a fairly text-based kind of buy, sell, and trade kind of website. That is probably not the most aesthetically pleasing website, for instance, but do users accept that system as being useful, as being easy to understand and use? And kind of from there, it's only from that user interface and the system as a whole being acceptable to the user that we get into kind of larger scale dimensions of user experience. So its usefulness, its utility, the cost of that system, reliability. Does this thing crash often? Does it not provide support in ways that it should? So I kind of see this from left to right if you're looking at this graph as a bit of a, here's where we have usability and the user interface. And as we move to the right, we kind of have those dimensions of user experience and how users interact or are not able to interact with a particular system. So a big thing that we'll do in this class is measure usability. So, we'll look at so many different evaluation methods and, modes of research and inquiry. And ultimately what we're trying to be able to do with this class is to be able to effectively measure the usability of a particular system, a number of them, and to do it in a number of different ways. A big thing to stress is that usability and kind of, showcasing that system's acceptability should not be subjective or argued. Rather, this has to be backed up by data, right? So this is something that we will systematically approach, systematically measure, evaluate, and kind of improve upon. So the notion that it could be subjective is kind of thwarted by us needing data to provide evidence as to, what usability issues something might have. To test these things and to measure the usability of a system, it must be measured relative to certain users and specific tasks. So as opposed to, a kind of generalized questionnaire that you might give someone that you're testing a system with, we're going to test with certain users and specific tasks so that we can understand those specific types of users and issues that they may run into. Especially because, you'll have users that have different wants and needs as they approach this system. Typically, usability begins with identifying the specific tasks that users are going to be doing in a particular system, and what that system needs to provide to those users to achieve in a specific context. So, those 5 dimensions of usability. We'll start with learnability, and I'm just going to kind of give a little more detail on each of these things before we talk about some of the evaluation methods we'll be detailing in class. So, learnability. A system, any system, should be easy to learn so that users can rapidly get some work done or make progress with it. So when we think about this, when we talk about having certain users, typically when we're thinking about learnability, we want to focus on novice users, people that don't use this thing very often. So we want them to be able to learn a system effectively and quickly so that they don't have to think too much about the user interface, that it can kind of maybe fall away and they can be thinking strictly about their user experience. Typically, this is, a case where, the first experience that users have with a system, whether it's Amazon or, the Ball State app or any number of things, there's going to be some sort of learning curve. They're going to have to get in the box. They're going to have to do things to, kind of understand what they need from it and whether it's providing that for them. And generally speaking, a learnable system reduces the amount of time that it takes to complete tasks as the users kind of go from novice to a bit more experienced with it. So you shouldn't be, consistently, having the same issues that you run into in terms of learnability. You should be able to reduce that time over time. But keeping in mind that, learning is not a dichotomous thing. And by that I mean, we don't simply learn the system and then kind of close the book, right? As we continue to work with something, this is a continuous process. You could look to something like Facebook, which goes through, an aesthetic redesign, every 6 months to a year in terms of, some small part of it or a large overhaul. So, each time that happens, there's going to need to be scaffolding for users so that they can easily and quickly learn these things. So that's learnability. Efficiency. A system should be efficient so that once users have learned it, they are able to achieve a high level of productivity with it. So in this instance, typically when we're testing the efficiency of a system, we work with expert users as compared to novices, right? So someone who's learned this system over time, does it maintain efficiency so that users can still be productive with it? And then kind of generally having a kind of what I would call a steady state performance, meaning it kind of runs as intended once, a user's learning curve is flattened. Typically, in efficiency, time relative to the task is the core usability metric, and I'll detail some of those things, but we typically look at the time that a user has to take in order to achieve, a particular task. So the big metric that we tend to use in EMDD for this is average time on task. As you were to observe a user as they walk through a system or a website or an app, does the average time on task for a number of different users, does it feel relatively consistent, or does it vary wildly, and kind of, what might be the cause of that? Another metric would be keystroke level. So not something that we tend to track too much in EMDD, but how many keystrokes does it take a user to get to the thing that they want to do? Obviously, we want to reduce that as much as possible so that it can be very efficient. The mean time to failure. So if you test 20 users and they all come up with a kind of a consistent time by which they kind of fail at a task, or the system fails to provide them, the information they need to complete it, how long does that take? And then on the other side of the equation, what's the time saved? So as you're implementing maybe recommendations for changes to a system, how can we measure, how much time is saved by implementing those changes? So learnability, efficiency, now we go to memorability. It should be really easy to remember, basically. So casual users that kind of use this thing intermittently can return to it if, say, they haven't checked it out in 3 months, So back to my Facebook example, if you have kind of a big website overhaul and it's kind of like, it looks aesthetically way different than the last time someone saw something, that could have some issues in terms of memorability and where they go to find that particular way to post to a page, or a particular way to do something in the Facebook marketplace, or whatever it may be. Basically, you want to have your users not have to learn everything again, not have to focus on too much other than what they already know. So we tend to focus on casual users, as I said, people that use this, maybe intermittently. It's usually measured by a usability performance test or a memory test. So, a system where you may test users in one way 1 week and then maybe change a few things on the system, and see how well their memory kind of aids them in completing the tasks that they need to do. And often this system is going to draw on standardized design structures and or iconography. So as an example, up in the top left corner of most websites, there is some sort of home button, or Facebook, for instance, top left corner, the Facebook button takes you right back to your main page. Drawing on those kind of standardized design structures to reduce what we call the cognitive load, how much someone has to think about the action that they're trying to take. Being error-free and error-tolerant. This makes a lot of sense. You don't want to run into usability issues. It doesn't feel good for the user, doesn't feel good for the system either. You want to have a low error rate. If a user makes a mistake, they should be able to easily recover. The system should provide tools for that. They should provide scaffolding for that in many ways. And in our context, an error is any action that doesn't accomplish the desired goal. So this could be everything from difficulties in navigation and layout to get to a particular thing that you need, and doing it in the most efficient way. This could be any number of different kind of keystroke level mistakes that a user may make in testing with them. Typically measured by counting the number of incorrect actions during a specific task. That makes sense, right? So that you can kind of see, as you're observing a user, you can kind of understand their user journey. Okay, well, why did that person, what prompted them to go over here as opposed to go over here, or click that button instead of that button? Did it meet the user's needs in terms of, allowing them to, respond to what the system does? Often, also, the severity of an error is recorded, which I'll kind of, map out in a few different dimensions. But by and large, catastrophic errors must not happen ever. This is largely the reason that usability testing is, such a burgeoning field right now. And as we kind of dig into human-computer interaction even further, in our society, a catastrophic error is something that will put users in a place where they don't want to come back and use your system. It feels, not feasible for them to get what they need out of it. Little more on that. So talking about the severity, typically a combination of 3 different factors. First is frequency. So is it a common problem, or is it rare? Does this happen all of the time for every user? Is this, happening, strictly with those expert users or novices? How frequently does this thing happen? What's the effect? Is it going to be easy to overcome, or is it going to be difficult? Will users be able to get to, again, that thing they need? And then lastly, persistence of the problem. So is this a one-time problem that is, going to be overcome once they know about it, once they've kind of gone through that learning curve? Or is this something that users are repeatedly going to be bothered by? A very kind of annoying but persistent problem that I have with, say, the MyBSU system is in terms of checking out different classes and class lists and things like that. On my side, on the faculty side, it's often very difficult to remember the correct order of operations that you have to click into things to be able to, get to, the content that I want. There's a very specific kind of rigid structure that doesn't seem all that intuitive to me. It's a minor issue. I've kind of learned how that works, and I can kind of work around it. But it is persistent, it is persistently annoying. A little further, that kind of severity, that scale. So if we are kind of measuring severity in any different, type of usability scenario, we tend to use this 0 to 4 rating. So 0 being, I don't really, think that this is a usability problem at all the way on up to kind of minor and major usability problems, and kind of finally, catastrophes where, it's imperative to fix before a product can be released because it's going to generate far too much, anxiety in the user and inability to kind of do what they need. I'm going to go through satisfaction, which I think, as I was saying, kind of dovetails, I think, kind of nicely into, kind of thinking about usability issues as producing poor user experience. But a system should be pleasant, a user should want to use it. They shouldn't have to begrudgingly kind of continue to use a system. We tend to use a number of different kind of metrics for this, but think about how you might feel about, playing a video game or watching a movie on Netflix or, going to Amazon and shopping for something specific. Does it, relating to the purpose of that system, is it fun? Is it entertaining? Is it challenging? Easy, fast, time-consuming? What does it overall kind of feel for the user? We tend to measure these with both subjective and objective methods. So, a lot of interviews and empathy research about how people feel, their behaviors and attitudes toward a system. Likert scale surveys, so, scale of 1 to 7, 1 being this and 7 being this, how did this affect you? Semantic differential scales, which, we may get into a little bit. I think we'll focus a lot on kind of interviews, Likert scale stuff, and some other methods that are more objective than what's provided here. Some things that we don't do too often in EMDD, but are other ways at looking at potential usability issues would be things that haptically affect the user's actual body, so pupil dilation, are their pupils dilated and they're interested in the information? Does their heart rate go up or down while they're using something? These metrics are used a lot in, let's say, video games research and VR in terms of kind of the level of flow or the level of kind of how in the video game they are, is their heart rate going up when something's scary on screen? Is it not? Their adrenaline levels, things like that. So more of those kind of bodily metrics kind of work into satisfaction that way. I'm going to go through some of the evaluation activities and inspection methods, and I'm going to stop there for this week. It's a lot of text, and I'm not going to delve too deep into them. This is kind of just a preview of a number of the different methods that we'll be using in class, associated with your weekly assignments and things like that for testing systems. So in any usability testing, you always have to be able to evaluate. So you have to have an evaluation strategy. What do you want to achieve by conducting, these sessions with users, and what constraints do you have? What makes it, kind of a specific test? So is this a prototype that hasn't been released, and you have constraints in that it's not finished, but you're testing a certain portion of it, for instance? From there, an evaluation plan. So how and when is evaluation going to happen? Some form of data analysis. So how do you collate and summarize data so that you can kind of use it as evidence to make recommendations for a particular system? And then that data interpretation. So finding the causes of those issues and delivering that kind of set of recommendations, kind of documenting everything along the way in some sort of report. And we're going to do all of that in class through the semester. Few inspection methods, and again, I don't think it's too worth getting too deep in the weeds on all of these things, because we're going to do each of these in depth to some degree. But heuristics, so kind of methods by usability specialists that kind of judge whether each element kind of conforms to some established principles. Guideline reviews, so things like accessibility guidelines and being able to provide users of all different sorts with the ability to access your content. Does it conform with those guidelines? Pluralistic walkthroughs, where you walk through a system with not only users but developers and other stakeholders to kind of step through a scenario and kind of discuss usability issues along the way. And then consistency inspections, similar to pluralistic walkthrough, but focusing specifically on designers as opposed to kind of different kinds of stakeholders. Few more. A standards inspection, so an interface standards expert kind of inspects the interface for compliance. Does it meet kind of stated guidelines and standards? Cognitive walkthroughs, which we'll do a decent bit of in class, which is focusing on a procedure that you develop so that you can kind of walk through a user's problem-solving process as you give them specific tasks, and how does the human-computer dialogue kind of work with those tasks. And then formal usability inspection, so users, developers, and human-computer interaction specialists step through a scenario and kind of discuss usability issues associated with dialogue elements. So that dialogue between the human and computer, where is there a breakdown if there happens to be one? And I'm going to stop there for this week. I'm hoping it's about a 20-minute lecture. I'll check out when I'm done. But this week we'll be diving into an assignment that is kind of focusing on just taking this from a broad view and understanding how kind of usability affects user experience. And we'll be focusing more on some of these evaluation and inspection methods starting next week. But take a look at that assignment. Let me know, if it makes sense to you, if you have questions, and we'll just go from there. And I'm excited to see what you come up with. Thanks, y'all.